We're live. Hi there.
Live from downtown Denver.
At the Leading Amazing Teams course that we co-trained together.
Good stuff. I'm noticing all the ahas.
Yeah, that was from this morning.
And I was realizing, is there anything, humans. Oh, yeah. Do we have some questions queued up? Or
Yeah, well, the topic from this week from the video was the Scrum rules. And since we're in the leadership course this week, I thought we could kind of take some questions as we're dealing with Scrum rules and leadership and how we call it out or we don't call it out or how it's applied or not applied and go from there.
Yeah, sure.
Well, no, we do have some, but I just...
Oh, no, I just know we pretend sometimes leadership is a role, right? Leadership is like,
we fake it all the time.
There's no leadership in Scrum. And yeah, it's not an official role. So we also have a class with us, so we're actually in the back. We're live from the back of the room.
We're going to try not to look at anyone because they might make faces at us.
Yeah, that's actually, there's a couple of people nodding. So we may have some questions live from the audience, from the class here. So if they throw it out, we'll repeat. So
when it comes to roles, one of the questions that we got was when it comes to roles, which role has a harder leadership dynamic to it?
Yes.
I asked the question so we get to start.
Yes, I would say yes. I think the Scrum Master, both the Scrum Master and the product owner have a pretty challenging leadership role. The Scrum Master is in this kind of be a servant leader, which is servant leadership is very misunderstood. And you know, if you're trying to tell your boss that you've done a great job and you're a servant leader, they're like, well, so how did you do this year? You know, what did you accomplish? You're like, yeah,
did you do anything?
I'm a servant leader, man. Like, yeah, everything's cool. Like, yeah, awesome. You know, and they're like, but what did you do? I'm like, well, I didn't really do anything. The team did everything because I'm a servant leader. So if you're trying to, you know, talk to your boss about it's hard to explain in a lot of companies and a lot of cultures that they don't quite understand that role of being a servant leader as a Scrum Master.
That's interesting. I tend to get a little different of experience in terms of actual Scrum Masters feeling like we know we want to be serving the team, but the team doesn't always know what they need or want and how to help and the struggle between moving from a management type position or role to a leader type role and going, where's my value? Am I part of this team? Am I not part of this team? And I tend to find a lot more Scrum Masters that are inserting themselves too much and deciding that that's their value, whether it be over facilitation, like, what's your daily stand-up? What's your daily stand-up or Scrum right. Or just inserting and kind of trying to solve all the problems and versus learning new skills on how to really coach and facilitate and lead, which is why we created this course, obviously. But then having the boss go, well, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then they have a huge list of things, but not necessarily things that really are helping that development team grow into a self-organizing team.
Well, and then in that sense, when they're kind of overdoing it, doing more than they need to, then a lot of times we hear from the teams, right? The teams are saying,
frustrated.
The development team says, well, frustrated. They're micromanaging, or they're in there, asking everybody a question. I know
they say we're empowered.
Right. Yeah. Poof, you're empowered. And now everything is good. Unicorns, rainbows, proceed. I find that's one of the most common observations I get in teaching just kind of core Scrum is people are kind of shocked when we talk about the Scrum Master doesn't have to go to the daily Scrum, the daily stand-up. People are like, what? What do you mean? It's like, well, who will tell people to speak? It's like, you've got adults. You've got a team of adults, 7 people, 9 people, 8 people, 12 people. I know 12 is illegal. It's too many. But if you have that group, if they can't figure out how to talk or who's going to talk first in a 15-minute daily Scrum, daily stand-up, how are they going to build a product? Right? I mean, so there's some of this is if you feel like nobody will talk without you as a Scrum Master, that could be something to explore and dig into.
Ooh, we got a new question. How can organizations measure the impact of Scrum Master setting? I like that I'm getting the question.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
because you always have to start.
No, that's a great
fantastic setup.
It is. That's a great question, Tricia.
It's almost like a pseudo.
Yeah. What do you feel like is the biggest thing you'd highlight there?
Oh, nice turnaround. So when I managed and led Scrum Masters in a couple different organizations, I came at it from an approach of the team. Like, is the team becoming more self-organizing? Is the team's satisfaction high? And then on top of it, not just from a team focus, but also the customer satisfaction. Are we delivering? Are they continuing to improve quality and try and solve customer problems and not just check marks and what's happening? And so when I really look at the Scrum Master's impact, I look at the team's results. Yeah. And because I don't fall in the camp of self-organizing teams don't have managers, quote, / leaders. I fall in the camp of self-organizing teams are results often of amazing leadership. And so I look at that from that dynamic. Is how I try and measure and what they're doing and how proactive they're being, not just reactive.
Well, it's both ways, right? How proactive the Scrum Master is, how proactive the development team is, how they're working together, how the product owner is working with them. But it really is the hard part is you really have to kind of shift metrics a bit away from the quantitative and more to qualitative, because it's very hard to just say, oh, they're a 2.6, whatever 2.6 means, and just, well, it's just we try to oftentimes with metrics break them into here's a metric to tell, and so often looking at a number of things can help, but
I read this and I hate being live because I cannot look up a source right now, but I had a company just released, I guess it was a while ago, but a single question for their reviews in terms of would I hire this person again? And I really like that dynamic of, is this Scrum Master somebody that's scaling teams, right? And creating high performing environments, creating environments where teams want to thrive and do as a result. And ultimately, if I would hire them again, is I don't get or have feedback for them that they need to work on. No, that's ridiculous. But I try and really keep that challenging growth and feedback separate from performance measurements, because you can do a lot of damage there.
Well, and a lot of times when people are asking those questions, well, how do I measure? How do I measure if this person is doing a good job? If you start to dig into those, a lot of times there's something else under there. It's like, well, but I don't feel like they are doing a good job, or I don't trust them, and so then generally that's coming from their leaders, and so then it's a question to their leaders. So how are you engaging with them? And that slips into that. Well, they're empowered. I'm not engaging with them at all. It's like, that's not good. Telling people they're empowered will generally lower their productivity.
I like to think of it as aiming a bus at them. And
don't do not do that. Not a recommendation.
With product owners, what's the most challenging aspect?
They don't need leadership. That's a tough one, I think, because it kind of depends on where the product owner is. There's aspects of product owners need to have good facilitation skills, need to really actually understand a decent amount about Agile and Scrum. And in a lot of cases, we haven't really done them a great service because they're kind of, they don't need to know that much about Agile and Scrum, but they do, and they need to trust it. They need to understand the process and buy into just the concept of like validated learning is one example. But the other really big thing that comes up at almost everybody that I'm working with is how many products they're working on at the same time, how they're valuing the products, how they're evaluating the products. The product owners, run into people with 3,000 items in a backlog, and just start doing some basic math. And they're great product owners, right? They're great product owners, but because they're trying to keep track of all this stuff. And we start doing some basic math about, a team's doing about 10 items a sprint, you have 5 teams, 50 items. We start to break this down. It's like, so you have 7 years of stuff in your backlog, you're never going to get to it. So, there's this kind of product portfolio piece, and having the, sometimes the courage, sometimes a little bit at the edge to take, 2,000 items in your backlog and delete them, or put them in a spreadsheet and mark it. We are never, ever, ever going to do these. Is a common recommendation. But just trying to be able to, really push up in the organization to go, it's not possible to do 100 of these at once. We're just wasting our time and we're going slower.
I 100% agree, but to give a different flavor too, one of the things that I think isn't focused on enough, and actually I think this came up in our class yesterday, was creating leadership teams. Right? Is there a partnership between that product owner, that Scrum Master? Is there mutual respect and teamwork going on? Because in a lot of ways, they together are leading this team, and I think that gets a little lost often in understanding how they need to be working together, especially if you have product owners reporting to one area and Scrum Masters reporting to another. That can add complexities on top of it. But I think the teams that I've seen really excel, there's usually a really great partnership between product owner and Scrum Master working together, so that when that Scrum Master comes back and says 3,000 items on your backlog, crazy, they're like, but you don't understand my job, versus, well, what can we do and how do we work through it? And leadership can be lonely. So even having that partnership in terms of being able to work together, I wish more attention was brought onto that aspect, because I just don't think enough are doing that.
Well, they get the focus almost overly focused on just, we're so focused on our role, and we don't kind of look up. And technically, part of the Scrum Master's role is supposed
cross-functional teams in general.
Yeah.
Oh, we got another one.
Woo-hoo.
Can you explain the difference between product owner and product managers?
Probably product owners and product owners.
Maybe.
No. So it's an interesting one. So Scrum specifically has a role called the product owner. So in very, I guess the simplistic part of it is that it's just called a product owner. Don't tell anyone, but if you happen to be calling them a product manager instead of product owner, I don't care. But don't. Oh wait.
It's live though. We're done.
All right. You can't delete that now. Okay. That's why I don't hit live.
You gotta go with it.
Right. Own it. But I don't really care what the title is as much as I really like to look at what are all the different things that the product people have to do. So a couple very simple examples is somebody's refining the backlog, somebody's owning that backlog management for a particular product. That has to be done, and working with the teams, development teams to do that, doing that refinement, working with stakeholders. Somebody who's doing that. There might also be somebody who's out actually demoing products on the road to various stakeholders, various customers, prospective customers, learning what's going on in the market, going to trade shows. That could possibly be done by one person. It may not. So sometimes people have a product owner who is primarily working with the teams on the product, and then there's another product owner who's traveling around the country. As a kind of simple example, sometimes that's a product manager, sometimes it's not. So it's really, instead of the title, it's more about this title of a role, product manager, product owner. What are the things that they need to do? What are the things that you need done in your organization to be successful? And then whatever title works for you.
Yeah, this is not my area very much. I see a lot when I do see product managers more. They tend to have portfolio dynamics sometimes, as well as marketing dynamics that can come into play. Here's my thing is just make it clear. Make sure, not clear to the point of that's your job, this is my job, but clear in terms of who's responsible for what are you trying to do that you need to accomplish, the different responsibilities that need to occur. Be clear about it, but still willing to work together. Don't get stuck in your silos.
Well, it goes back to what you said a minute ago. It's with the Scrum Master and product owner. If you have a product manager and a product owner, you get two product owners, whatever. If they're doing different things, they have different responsibilities. There's going to be overlap, and they need to work together. They should be working as a team. Not
if not.
or a couple.
So from a development team, how do you see leadership playing out in development teams? By the way, I'm always going to be the question.
I'm learning. Somehow I didn't have. Of course, I'd be like, wait. To me, everybody on a development team is going to bring leadership in different aspects if the team's functioning well. Certainly, if you have quote unquote senior developer, and I'm not saying by title, but somebody with more experience with the product or application, then I would expect that they would bring some, some leadership to the table. But leadership not saying, I would expect it.
But that's not always true. It was an interesting dynamic that I had in the past where I was like, to be a senior in my mind meant helping others learn and helping branch that out. And I got it completely. I had some that were like, no, it just means I'm technically excellent. I'm like, that's well, exactly. Sure. I expect that too.
Yeah.
I expect both.
But that's the problem, right? I mean, we were talking about this yesterday in class. Often the people get promoted because they're experts, because they're really great at solving the problem. You know this product, we're going to make you a senior developer.
Nice try.
And right, but we never have. We don't actually help that person go. But there's more to being a senior developer. Just because you're a senior developer doesn't mean you're a leader. That involves helping people. Just because you can do it in an hour and everybody else in the team is going to take 10 hours, that doesn't really, if that's day one, great. But if that's still going on a month, 2 months, 3 months in, it means you're not mentoring, you're not pair programming, you're not doing these other things to help them. And it's not necessarily the fault of the senior developers, right?
No,
I don't really want to point at anybody, but who put them in that position? There's this leadership.
Well, we do this with many roles.
Yeah, how do we help them?
We promote them based on their skill sets of their previous roles and their delivery and results of their previous roles. Promote them and don't give them the skills for their new roles.
Right.
And so they use the skills that they had before because they don't necessarily have new knowledge, new capabilities to complete that other area.
And even the people on the teams don't know that, right? The other people on the teams don't realize, hey, we're asking them for different things. So there's a transparency gap here that we want to make sure the teams are realizing, everybody on the development team realizes not just this person we're saying is a leader.
Here we got one. Does Scrum Master need to be a full-time job?
Yes, and it's such a common question. The Scrum Guide
there you go, start there officially.
says that the Scrum Master, is more, specifically I think say full-time, but essentially the implication is that Scrum Master is a full-time job. I've seen successful Scrum Masters on being a Scrum Master for 2 teams. Above 2 teams, I think it turns into usually a mess. Depending on the organization, though, and the products of the teams, can easily be a full-time job for a Scrum Master with on one Scrum team, because there's so much more to it than the admin in the hub. If you're just the admin in the hub, you're just answering questions, you're just scheduling, meetings, those kinds of things. Then that's
you're not helping them become a team. At that
point. And you have much more in you as a human. You have way more to offer. So it's how do you move beyond some of those things, and that starts to take more time.
So my general rule for this was, can you have part-time leadership? Do you only want part-time leaders?
Here on Fridays,
I will only have leadership on Fridays and Mondays. It doesn't work that way. In my experience, my general rule of thumb is if it's a brand new team, it's dedicated full-time Scrum Master. If it's a team that is struggling, not really being anti-fragile, not really working towards high performance, 1 full-time Scrum Master. Once you get a team to that self-organizing state, having a Scrum Master across multiple teams, 2 teams, has been effective, works fine, as long as that team, at least one of the teams, is self-organizing state. But I agree, beyond when you start getting into 3+, I had somebody that was like, I'm a Scrum Master for 8 teams. I was like, oh,
really?
Wow. And I'm trying to get thoughts out of my head before I was like, so what's your day like? And her day was scheduling meetings and running from meeting to meeting and agenda. And at that point, you're not leading, you're just reacting.
Well, you don't see.
You can't.
You can't even. Yeah. You just don't notice what else is happening, and that's really where to look at what's really going on around. Yeah.
See, and I'm not being rude looking at my phone, though. It's the questions. What concerns would you have with the team lead having HR responsibilities to the team members who codes and are part of the team? So if your Scrum Master is actually the manager.
Well, I would have all kinds of concerns. Let me get a sheet of paper out there, probably a flip chart. Fundamentally, the Scrum Master is supposed to be, they're not supposed to be, committed to, they're not committed to the work. The development team commits to the work in Scrum. So the Scrum They're supposed to help them remove impediments. And if suddenly they're also their manager, then they're naturally going to have some conflicts with trying to be that, trying to be a servant leader, trying to be somebody who's truly just helping people to grow, to learn, to progress without trying to tie it back to organizational goals. This disconnect. Now, that's not to say it's not possible to do. I've seen it happen. I've done it. You've done it. Well, but it's not.
So that's the dynamic, right? I 100% agree. Challenging for you Scrum masters that are especially learning this role. I mean, every conflict you just highlighted and even more, I'm absolutely against it. I personally have been a Scrum Master where my development team reported to me. And it meant that I really had to understand coaching skills. I had to have really sound leadership and coaching skills in order to make sure I understood the dynamics that came with the structure, and how to create exercises, how to create situations that remove some of that dynamic, and very intentionally did that. It meant going above and beyond. I used a lot of pair facilitation with other Scrum Masters in the organization. So yes, it is feasible, but you really have to understand what you're how you're potentially impacting that development team and how they can take ownership as you're going forward. And do you have the skills to do that? It is possible. It's not recommended.
Yeah, there's another piece as well that I use a lot if somebody's in that is digging into the transparency of it, making sure that the development team here. Sometimes I'll even put a flip chart up or recommend, if it's me here, I'm going to put it up, or if it's somebody I'm working with. These are potential conflicts that we're going to have, and having that conversation with the team. Hey, if this happens, if you find me not being the Scrum Master and being your boss and not a conflict, I want to talk about that in advance. What do I want you guys to do? What am I okay with the team doing? Can they call me out on it?
Absolutely.
Am I okay with that? Or
made me think of one of the teams that I was able to do it most effectively was because I was not the expert at all. So my ability to kind of take over or give a solution was very limited because I had no idea about the technology or the customer even at that point. I was truly just serving the team, and it really helped with that dynamic. But if not, I had to make sure this is my role, this is what I'm stepping in, because in any case, there is that dynamic. But I have done it. I've seen others do it. I don't recommend it, but I also don't act like it's gonna ruin the world either. We were successful, and doing it just as a special case. You have to be very intentional about it.
If anybody in the room has a question for Tricia, feel free to throw your hand up and give us that. We might have.
Dang it, you did it.
So piggybacking on that, because that was my question. I'm also curious about a team lead who is a dev lead. So the devs report to that dev lead who's the code. It's almost like an architect or a code lead.
So a team lead. So the question is, what about a team lead who's also they're on a dev team and the manager, essentially the manager's on the development team. So what do you think about that, Tricia?
Nice switch. Good job.
Thank you.
So Scrum guy, there are no individual titles or different roles.
Relevant team member.
As a member. In practice, this was back in 2008-9. We started doing Scrum and doing different things and trying and learning and experimenting with it, not always doing it perfectly by any means. We had lead devs on the team. They didn't report to the lead dev, so that was one dynamic that helped, I think, in some ways. But we also really clearly worked with the lead devs that part of their role was to help raise that technical excellence for the other developers on the team, and not just be the one that produces the most code or checks in the most code. In terms of reporting to the development team, I actually have never had experience where my development team reported to the lead developer. I've always had kind of a development manager or a functional manager that handled that aspect. So I don't know if I have any real experience, but I would imagine that the same dynamics would come in to play with that.
It's very similar to the situation we were talking about previously. And so the transparency aspect is really important. In some ways, I almost feel like it's more important to really work with that person on what their skills are, what their role is, because they don't, if we're a manager and it's like, oh, we're doing Scrum now, so we don't have this role, so oh, you're just going to be on the team. And they haven't really worked with that person or the team, the rest of the team, to figure out, hey, what kind of conflicts might come up here. In some cases, not a big deal, because they already have a great working dynamic. In other cases, if they were working in
or different habits, right?
Yeah,
they're like, I assign all the tasks out, you're going to be in trouble.
Right, and that's so it's trying to really get into what does that mean in the specific team, and try to break it down. Again, bringing in the transparency, and then making sure they have the skills and people to work with to help them. Because generally, we do a lot of kind of setting up to fail, not on purpose. We don't dedicate the time to helping folks with that. So, what do you think? Another question from the audience?
Should leaders go to the daily Scrum?
Should leaders go to the daily Scrum? I love that question.
People outside of the Scrum team go to the daily Scrum.
What does the Scrum guy say?
I'm going to go with my experience with it. In a lot of cases, when we first started doing daily Scrums, we had a lot of leaders that wanted in the organization, executives, functional managers, that wanted to, this was their way of getting access and information and knowledge, and so they wanted to attend. But the more effective we made our daily Scrums, that they were truly about inspecting and adapting for the team and how they're working together, what they're doing, it kind of quickly became like, no, this isn't at all the information I need or want or value to me, and they just didn't go. So we kind of, how I approached it the first time is I capped it, like we can only have a couple observers per meeting, so it wasn't
giving out tickets.
I was like, I didn't go that far, but I prevented it from being like a fishbowl kind of feeling where everybody's just looking at them, but also to get an experience with it and knowledge with it. But I personally found that the more effective we made our daily Scrums, the less leadership or other members of the organization felt like that was the meeting to use or to get their value, because that was really for the team and for them to inspect and adapt. So the less it became status report, the less interested those functional managers and executives or any other managers or leaders in your organization were.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be for the development team, for them to figure out, hey, how are we doing towards our sprint goal? How are we doing towards what we committed to? And that's what they're working on. My rule of thumb is that if you go to the daily Scrum and you want status, you should always leave sad. That's what I tell people in all my classes. If you go to the daily Scrum and you want status, you should leave sad. And
I like it.
If you have people coming for status, you just make sure that they're sad when they leave, because they will eventually stop coming, or other things, I guess, may happen. But I would follow up in making
sure what they are looking for.
That's the key.
And why they're, why they think this is the meeting that they should be meeting. And if there's another avenue or another way to providing that information, I wouldn't just try and cut those ties of communication.
No, absolutely. That was the other piece, right? Because the reality here is, if somebody's going there for status, that means that they're missing something. So are they part of the sprint review? Are they invited to the sprint review? Are they seeing what's going on at the end of the sprint? Do you have a transparent board that shows the work getting done? Because if somebody needs to know that a product backlog item is 28.6% complete, and that backlog is going to take 2 or 3 days to do, you got a different problem. And so try to get to that root cause. You want to get to, what do they need? What are they concerned about? And if you start having people suddenly show up at the daily Scrum asking for status, that is an immediate flag, right, that something is broken. Something else is going on, and so now they're going, I just better go there and find out. Because usually people are concerned about risk. They don't want to be surprised by failure, surprised by some issue, and that's why they end up going there. Sometimes it's excitement getting started, but over time, if they start showing up, so that's what we want to start to dig into.
So we're almost out of time, and I'm going to ask the final question.
I was just thinking she probably is. Yes.
And I think it's something of what would be you leave sad. It made me think of this. Is when you gave that, I want you to leave sad. Is what would be?
I don't want you to leave sad, but I don't want you to be sad.
Oh no, you said
I want you to
own
leave
it.
sad. I don't want you to be sad.
So what would be like kind of a simple line or sentiment that you would leave for the Scrum roles and their leadership? Like, what would the key message you would give to them as they're taking on these roles and embarking in leadership? What would be a key point or message you would leave them with? A key piece of advice maybe is a better way of putting it.
Yeah, well, I think this ties into leadership too. The thing I really try to focus on is what I call transparent business decisions. So we make business decisions all the time. So sometimes we make them by not making them. They're made because we don't take any action or we ignore the item. But trying to make these business decisions, making them transparent. Does everybody know about why we made this decision? Does everybody know about why this is happening? Because we see this all the time where a Scrum Master starts doing something and the development team doesn't understand it, or the product owners, the team doesn't understand the vision from the product owner, or the leadership changes something. You have to focus on products, and maybe the product owner doesn't know. So making sure just across the whole, all those roles, we have that communication. Specifically, though, zeroed in on that. Hey, here's a business decision, and it's transparent why we made it. That's the biggest thing I find, I guess the key.
And I will add to that. We're back. Leadership in any role is challenging. Don't try to find help, find support, find anything for yourself. It's challenging. It's doable.
Sometimes it's easy.
But it doesn't make it long.
Help me. Sometimes it's that easy. You might be.
Yeah. It was useful. Till next time.
Thanks.